In April 2016, Jen was 35 years old. She had two babies, a small business, and headaches that everyone kept explaining away. Stress, hormones, new motherhood. And then she had an MRI, and the neurologist called her back 10 minutes after she got home. A brain tumor, the size of a lemon. What Jen made from that moment and the quiet that followed changed everything.
I call my mom to tell her, okay, well, it's over. And while I'm on the phone with my mom, someone's calling on the other line. So I said, oh, hang on, I'll call you back. I think the neurologist is calling. Now, I'm in California. In New York, when I say that to my mom and she hangs up, she's like, that is not good. The neurologist should not be calling you 10 minutes after you got home. So she's starting to panic where she is.
You're listening to the Life Shift Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Gilhooly. This show is built around one simple idea, that sometimes a single moment can change how we see everything. Each week, I talk with someone about the moment that shifted their life and how they learned to live differently after it. These are not stories about having it all figured out. They are stories about what it looks like to keep going once the story changes. Thank you for being here. Here's today's story. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Shift Podcast. I am here with Jen. Hello, Jen.
Hello, Matt. How's it going?
Well, it is a Tuesday night, and today, actually, it's in March, so I don't know when people are listening to this. I think it's going to be this summer, but it's in March. Today, I released a book into the world, so that was kind of fun. It's called Still Here. Yeah, and I've had 4 years of conversations on this show, and what I did was I've collected kind of like the parts of people's stories that stuck out to me. And it's around their life shift moments, of course, and like how I remember them telling me, and then what I think that could mean for all of us. So it's like 250 pages, but they're short, easy kind of pass through things. So I'm super excited about it, and I'm proud of it. So I did it all myself. It's just, independently published, but put it together and designed it.
Well, congrats on that one, but I'm more excited for the sequel when you could put my thing in it. So
fair. Yes, right now it has
No, but that's
a
amazing.
little over 100 stories in it, which I thought was a good first pass. I've had nearly almost 260 now conversations on this show. And so I just want to say thank you for wanting to be a part of this journey. It's kind of weird to say this, but all the conversations, no matter what they're about, have healed me in a way that like I didn't know that version of me, or this version of me, still needed healing after my own life shift moment. And so it's just been such a pleasure to understand firsthand the power of storytelling. I think on the surface, I always kind of knew, like logically I knew there was power in storytelling, but to witness it, to be a part of it, and then to feel it myself has been just such a beautiful journey. So I'm excited that you wanted to just unpack your story in this Matt way.
Yeah, I have a lot of resonance with what you're saying about using narrative to work through something. And I think we'll get into that too. So I see.
Yeah. Well, and I think that for me, I was always trying to find the medium that would work for me, and started with writing. I think that was always like something that everything was much scarier in my head. And then when I got it out on paper, or even now saying it out loud, I'm like, oh, well, I can put that together. I can move through that differently, but far scarier in my head. And so this has been just fun to see people telling their story for the first time sometimes, and to just, you can like witness the weight leaving, which is an honor, really, at that point.
Yeah, a shift, one might say.
One might say that. And so anyway, maybe you can tell us before we get into your story, which has, I'm well aware that you probably have many life shift moments in your life. But before we get into it, maybe you can tell us who Jen is in 2026. Like, how do you show up in the world? How do you identify these days?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me again. So these days, I would be known as a mom. I have two sons who are 10 and 13 years old. I live in Arlington, Virginia, but I am from New York, and then we spent 7 years in California. So I'm a little nomadic, and I run a business called Plucky. and Plucky is a leadership coaching and consulting business. So that's going to be 13 years old later this year. So a lot of people know me as a coach or a teacher of trainings. But the biggest and kind of spiciest way that people know me these days is also as an author. I also just released a book 2 months ago, and it is the story of being diagnosed with a brain tumor. It'll be 10 years in April, so in a few days actually. And
spoiler alert.
Seriously. And so, a really big part of my identity is being a survivor of a brain tumor. It was not cancerous. There's your other spoiler, thank God, but had enormous repercussions on my life and who I became and how I approached everything really after that time. So I'll also just say that I don't know if you have these moments, Matt, but I do really feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be right now. And that has not always been true. There have definitely been seasons where I felt like I was like off on like the shoulder of a highway or something. Like, where am I going? What path am I on? But these days, I'm feeling pretty solid about that. And I'm grateful.
Yeah. Feeling more aligned, would you say, with what you feel, where you feel you should be? I think sometimes we should ourselves a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm someone who's pretty intuitive, and I pay a lot of attention to my energy and, who I'm spending time with or what I'm spending time on, I guess. And I think it also depends on my children's ages, frankly, but or the responsibilities I have in my life. But I think right now I feel like everything is very lined up with what I would want it to be. And there's a big question mark moving forward of, once this, I guess I'll show the book, but this is my book called I Believe in Everything, Memoir of Illness, Motherhood, and Magic, and some of the magical things that happened during brain surgery. And so anyway, all that to say that I'm on book tour right now, and it feels like bringing my story to an audience of people who probably haven't had brain tumors, but need a little hope and inspiration in 2026 feels super aligned.
Well, thank you for what you're putting into the world through your experience. I think people don't necessarily have to have the same experiences as us to understand the feelings, the emotions, the things that come along with it. And I think that's kind of what binds us together as humans, if we allow it to, which is a really beautiful thing, because I've heard so many stories wildly different than my own, in which I can still connect with and understand, like I said, still heals me in some way, because, some part of their story just resonated with me, or the way they felt about the experience, or whatever it may be. So yeah, I think, we need more of that and less of putting us in different boxes.
Well, I was thinking of this, I listened to a few of your episodes, which now I'm subscribed, so I'll listen to all of them. But I listened to a few of the episodes in the last couple of weeks, and I didn't have anything at face value in common with the two guests that you had in those episodes. But I mean, big same. I remember reading a book a couple years ago, like a memoir, I guess, of an astronaut. I read another one of a guy who lost both his legs in the military and was running marathons. Like, I am not an astronaut, I am not in the military, and I have both legs. But still, there were things in those stories that I don't know that they healed me, although I appreciate your framing of it. I think for me, they inspired me. And so it wasn't necessarily like filling a deficit. It was more just like a launching. And I don't really want to run a marathon, but I like the idea of being like, hold my beer, we're doing it, and that resonates a lot for me with, just like hearing other people's challenges and feeling, well, if they could do it, what might I do with that?
Yeah. And sometimes it's really a nice reminder of the resilience of the human spirit, and seeing that, I don't know if you felt this way, and we'll get into your story in just a second, you could tell me, but I think a lot of us, when we're in those moments, in these life shift, these pivotal moments in which our life changes from a before and an after, however many times that happens in our lives, oftentimes we feel very alone. Like, it feels very isolating. It feels like, how could I, like, where is the map? How do I do this? How can it ever get better? For a lot, I obviously resonate more with the hard parts, but I think you hear these stories and you're like, I could not imagine going through that and taking another step. And then you hear the stories of how they did and how they're seemingly thriving in this new version of themselves. And so that in itself is inspirational without really them meaning to be. Like, we're just trying to survive, and somehow they got lucky, and they did. You know, I say they got lucky because not everyone has the tools to find that lucky spot of getting through, you know, and so we have to honor those people that just weren't equipped to move through as well. So anyway, went off on this beautiful tangent, which I think is super important to talk about, but I do want to talk about your story. So to set us up, maybe you can paint the picture of who Jen was leading up to this, spoiler alert, you already told us, life shift moment. Tell us who that before version of you was.
Yeah, so I'll take us back literally 10 years, 2016, April 2016, and I had a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old. So I had pretty much just, given birth 8 months earlier. I had this little fledgling business that I was doing 2 days a week when I could have daycare for the boys. And at that point, I think, I was consulting. I was doing a version of coaching, mostly for people in the tech industry. But in both those cases, it was like, it felt really early days. It was early days of being a parent. Like, even at 3 years old, you're barely really, or at least for me, I didn't really know what I was doing. I mean, you're just like,
I don't think any parent does.
Well, they're still alive, like I don't know. So it was so early days as a parent, and that identity of mother, and then working mother. And then it was also super early days of running my own business. We were also pretty newly in California. We had moved there in 2014. So there's just a lot of like newness. And I guess what I mean is like unrootedness. But, the 8-month-old was getting bigger and things were moving, but I had headaches, and I was constantly going to the doctor, feeling like I was a pain in their ass.
Was it new?
Like something's
like new headaches, or did you always have them growing up?
No, I didn't always have them growing up. They were getting like worse, meaning that almost every afternoon I was taking Advil. There were other symptoms, but again, I had just had a baby. So you're like all janked up, like, who knows, you're not feeling great. And that's what everybody kept saying. Well, you just had a baby, you have a small business, you're stressed, you're a mom. And it wasn't only headaches, it was like also other weird symptoms, but nothing I would have known to put together. So for example, I would notice that my eyes would get teary sometimes, like super teary, especially my left eye. And I was just like, I don't know, maybe allergies, just like a whole bunch of stuff. And I also, Matt, want to be really clear that almost definitely anybody listening to this podcast does not have a brain tumor currently, because sometimes I describe some of these symptoms, and sometimes I feel like there should be a warning on the cover of the book to this end, because I think you can start to be like, oh my gosh, I've had headaches, I have allergies, like maybe there's something going on, and by all means get it checked out. But anyway,
were you someone though before this, like growing up, or even in your 20, I don't know how old you were, but in your teens and 20s, were you someone that would dismiss kind of how you were feeling and write it off as such? Or were you someone that was always going to the doctor to check out because you were worried that you were sick? Where were you on that spectrum?
Great question. Nope. Never worried on big levels. I grew up, my mom's a nurse. She's now retired, but she was an oncology nurse. So I grew up hearing about, terminal illness. I was a candy striper at the hospital. I wasn't only working with patients who were, in serious illnesses. I was also like wheeling people to, new babies out to their cars, like, stuff like that. So I had familiarity with hospitals. It wasn't scary to me really, that setting, but I think that what I was perceiving back in those moments was the challenges were having 2 babies and trying to figure out how to build that business. Like, those were the things on my radar. Health, this was irritating, these symptoms. It wasn't scary. I wasn't, paranoid about it, nothing like that. And so I kind of advocate for myself enough where eventually some doctors like, why is nobody telling you to see a neurologist? I'm like, I don't know. First I'm hearing of this. And so I get into the neurologist. Again, same thing. you're probably stressed, you're nursing. It's probably related to hormones, like just all this crap. And like on some level, I, of course, think this is like horrifying that nobody figured this out faster. But on another level, I was 35. I was in good shape. I was healthy. And again, had a lot of things to live for and good stuff going on. And I don't think that I really expressed how concerned I was. Maybe I didn't even really know. But all that said, eventually I get referred for an MRI, which is, like kind of like a type of X-ray, let's say, of my head. And that was specifically like, well, let's just make sure it's nothing structural, by which they mean something like unknown in your head. And so this was April 8th, 2016. And I had a really early appointment, like 7 a.m. So I go, they take pictures. I read about this in the book, but they put me in the MRI tube, which is like a skinny little thing, And after a couple pictures, the very nice gentleman who was doing the pictures pulls me out again. And he says, something's wrong with this machine. I have to take you to the one across the hall. Now, looking back, I realize he saw a very large brain tumor and was like, we're going to need the big guns here. And I think about his day so often, Matt, honestly, like, what was that like for him to get me out, walk me across the hall? I mean, I'm like, oh, thanks so much, man. This is not as scary as I thought to be in the tube. Like, I mean, he has to maintain total chill, right?
Because he's not allowed to tell you anything, right? Because they're just the technicians, not just the technicians, but they are technicians and they're not allowed to tell you what they see.
And meanwhile, we're like 5 minutes in, there's like a whole bunch of other pictures to take. So they put me in this other room and he takes a bunch of pictures. And then the next time they pull me out, another person's in the room, this woman. And she's there and says, oh, are you having headaches, sweetie? And I said, yeah, I don't know. Maybe my wisdom teeth are coming in. Like this is how far off I am from what ends up happening. And anyway, eventually they finish. I leave. My sister drives me home. And like, I call my mom to tell her, okay, well, it's over. And while I'm on the phone with my mom, someone's calling on the other line. So I said, oh, hang on, I'll call you back. I think the neurologist is calling. Now, I'm in California. In New York, when I say that to my mom and she hangs up, she's like, that is not good. Mm-hmm. The neurologist should not be calling you 10 minutes after you got home. So she's starting to panic where she is. And so I'm like, oh, hey, how's it going? And he says, like, I'm calling to tell you we found a really large brain tumor and we can't believe you're functional, but it is the size of a lemon and it is behind your left eye and it's putting pressure everywhere in your brain. And it's like those little eye teary moments that I mentioned. Those are tiny seizures that you're having. And like, and I am like, huh? Like, what are you talking about? It was like, I think you called the wrong person. Like it was that completely unplanned, shocking news. And this is, we talk about what's the moment. That's the moment, right? This phone call. I remember I grabbed some Post-its and just started writing what he was saying. Cause I was like, I wasn't crying or freaking out. I was just like, really like, what? Like, what are you talking about? So I'm like taking these notes and basically he was like, you're going to need to have brain surgery like real fast. This is not good. You should see a neurosurgeon. I don't know. He gave me a few like directions and then he starts to like wrap up the phone call. And I'm thinking, whoa, like you cannot hang up right now, man. Like I got a lot of questions here, but I just said, what is your advice here? And he said, it's going to be a long road with many stops along the way. And then he was gone. And I was like, like just a few months ago, I had a tiny small piece published in a magazine called Second Diagnosis, which spoiler, I'm okay, but we keep monitoring things. And it's exactly the same feeling where I had this piece of information about my life and it was like I was in a tiny bubble that if before I called anybody or texted my husband to come home or anything, nobody else knew. And it's like, is it real yet? And I felt the same way in the fall when I wrote this little tiny piece, which is just about this like out of time little sneaky spot in the universe, you know, and you're almost like, well, if I never tell anyone, what will happen, you know? But of course I'm so panicked or just like shocked in the moment. That's probably the best word. It's not like I was planning on hiding the secret or anything. I just, when I reflect back on it, I think like that was a really thick moment of pause before everything now changes.
Yeah. Do you think it was the words that he said, or rather when he hung up and you had that bubble that you were in to really let it settle in you, that was maybe the bigger line in the sand for you?
Yeah. I think it's when he said the words, because I'm pretty sure that we have it documented somewhere. I can't tell if it was an email or a text or something, but I know I sent something while I was on the phone to my husband, said, you have to come home right now. I'm on the phone with the doctor. And so like, I hadn't said what it was, but I had kind of shot serious. That flare out. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Here's an odd question. I wonder if you thought about it. Do you think it was better that you didn't have the worry beforehand about the headaches and those things versus the other end where you could be worried about everything, and maybe you would have been diagnosed sooner, but you would have had more of that panic the whole time leading up to?
I mean, like, it wasn't great, man. You know, like to have no idea. But at the same time, I'm not really an anxious person overall. And that's like another aspect of this that we can talk about. But I do think the ripping the Band-Aid maybe was better in some ways, you know, that persistent kind of chronic anxiety. I know a lot of people in my life and my work who have that, and it is so debilitating. And so smooth sailing until you crash into an iceberg, I guess. Like, I don't know. There was no way I could have been more prepared. It wasn't like, oh, if I'd eaten less candy, I mean, like, so nothing, and they don't know what caused it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because my brain automatically attaches it to something similar with me, and where people have asked me this question before, in which, you know, I lost my mom to a motorcycle accident. So that was sudden, unexpected. I mean, it was like she got in the accident and then 5 hours later she was gone. Didn't know at all until she was gone. But then in my 30s, my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. She had become the mom to me. We were like best friends, and I knew that was coming. And for me, that was a beautiful experience because we knew it was coming, and I knew what I didn't get with the ripping the Band-Aid off kind of experience, that I could face that. And so that's where my brain went. And like, I've had people say, which one is harder? And you're like, they're both really hard, and they're hard for different reasons, right? Because one, you're anticipating, but you can do things to make it a better experience. One is like, holy crap, now what?
And I mean, I think you're bringing it from another angle too, right? Which is like, personally, in my own vacuum of a head, it was probably easier for it to be a surprise. But as you advocate for like a beloved person of me, for sure, I would want a slow burn for my children to say goodbye. Like, for sure. If that was, I mean, especially you were a kid, right? Like that.
But did you, okay, there's another question. When you got the information from the doctor, did your brain immediately go to, I'm going to die? Or were you more another angle?
I think, no. Everybody else did.
Fair.
But this,
yeah.
But again, like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm a total weirdo because my version of this,
embrace it.
All welcome here. My version of this was complete shock and then organized responsibility. So I was like, husband, come home, called my mom back, said, here's what's going on. She heard, okay, the kind of brain tumor it was called a meningioma. She said, okay, or that's what they think it is. Okay, that's not cancerous. Like, this is doable. She like immediately starts that. I'm texting my sister, come back over. I email my clients. 9:01. This phone call was 8:58. 9:01. I email all my clients for the day. Hey, y'all, I can't make our coaching sessions today. Something's come up. Like, this was my way of almost like stabilizing the room. And because I have these two babies, like 3 and 8 months, I have to wean the 8-month-old within the next couple days because they immediately put me on anti-seizure meds and stuff like that. So I don't really have the luxury of that emotional breakdown yet. Like, I am so needed with all these, maybe some people would have that different situation, but I really honestly think that having two such small young kids, the kids don't know. And even if you told them, they don't really know what you're talking about. They're tiny, so they're hungry. They need a nap. They want to watch Octonauts. They they need to go to school or have their diaper changed. And so that sort of like incessant like life that kept going was probably a real gift now that I look back, even though in the time it was like, we're in a tiny 2-bedroom house. How am I possibly going to get brain surgery and recover here in the back room when I can't read or write or listen to music or have any noise? Like, we've got 2 little boys, but I do think it created some like legitimate rhythm that I was able to focus on.
Well, and it gave you space in between the shock and the grief of the experience. I think a lot of people that face something like this or some kind of trauma, the planning, the being busy, the organizing things is a save for a lot of people. It doesn't really help when they eventually start grieving about it, but at least in the moment, it gives them purpose, if you will, to kind of move through. And I think a lot of people would resonate with that, like maybe not having the same experience as you, but also when everything feels really dire in your head, literally for you, you feel purpose in doing things and putting things together. And I've got this, and I think it gives space, as weird as that might sound to, but you kind of just described it. So
yeah, exactly. I was like, okay, my husband got home, my sister got home. Obviously, we're all sort of frozen. And I said, let's get the whiteboard. We need to find a brain surgeon. And so now we're all calling anybody we know who ever went to med school, anybody who's, my mom, obviously, who worked in oncology, like, we need the best brain surgeon that we can find. And so now this becomes a research project, right? And so I can use that sort of focus, organizing vibe to help resource the project, really. So let's find that person, put it on the calendar. When I was thinking about this conversation that you and I were going to have all day, there's this feeling that I think is important to share because maybe some of your listeners would resonate with it. So I said with the book that there was some spiritual moments that happened, right? Or magical moments, I called them. Not religious, but there were some moments that proved themselves out for me to feel like, oh, okay, there's something bigger than me in this life. And the first one was I had some visions in an MRI a couple of days before brain surgery, like visions of my future. I felt extremely calm. Like, I knew I was going to be okay. Another was like a dream I had a few days after where I met sort of like some big, very beautiful women. I think a listener might interpret that as angels. I'm not necessarily going to call them that, but these extremely welcoming, wonderful people who are making necklaces out of light. I'm like going into the whole thing here, but like there were a couple of these moments where I was just so flooded with calm and something is taking care of me that it became a backbone of this whole experience for me. And before I got to those moments, I'm a coach, right? So it's so bizarre. I'm like coaching myself in a way, right? Like I'm client and coach at the same time. And I just remember coming to this perspective of like, it's sort of like what's destiny, and I just thought, what if I picked this? What if Jen, pre-life, if that exists, what if I said, you know what you should schedule me for? Give me the benign brain tumor. I have no idea why I ever would have, but I sort of said, I'm going to assume that I did. And that now makes me feel more agency in this situation. So if I scheduled that for myself, what if I chose this life, this moment, these people around me? What would I have wanted to get out of that? And it was so helpful, Matt. And I honestly just remembered that perspective the other day when I was feeling a little overwhelmed with the world these days. And I thought, what if I chose that? What if I chose to be a person parenting 2 sons in 2026 in the country I live, in the place?
I'm not sure that
what does that give me? I mean, maybe it was my second choice. Like, I don't know what to say.
Yeah, maybe you really leaned into that one a little bit more. I think that makes a lot of sense. I also, this is going to sound wrong, but I don't mean it as wrong or mean, not mean. God, where am I going? I think I do mean it kindly. I'm curious if a lot of people do these things to give us some sort of safety feeling, like I don't know, a comfort. I don't think for my own experience, I don't think I could get to a place where I was like, what if I chose this?
Of course.
But I get it, because I think, other maybe less impactful things than my mom dying, I could get around that. I could be like, okay, this hardship here, surmountable. If I chose this, then I know I need this challenge. I can kind of move through it. So I think that's really interesting and very coach of you as well. Like it seems like very like affirmation-ish, if you will.
Well, and if I can just step in there to say, again, if we were talking about any version of my children being ill or something happening to them, like, there is no way that is an easy perspective for me to walk into. But I do think, and maybe for listeners who are having something tragic or, very large happening in their own lives, when it is you, the focus, like you're the protagonist of the story, you have control over that versus something happening to someone outside of you, which is that just feels like triple black diamond level.
Yeah.
Traumatic.
Well, here's a very signature Matt thought, and just curious if you ever put this thought anywhere, or you thought it at all as you were planning out, choosing the things, trying to get the right brain surgeon, kind of recovering any of these pieces. Did any of you start to doubt yourself because maybe the brain tumor is actually causing me to think a different way, or it's pressuring any of that? Like, I feel maybe I'm just like, cup's half empty, here's Matt, but just curious because I think that could seep into someone's head of like, well, maybe I'm not 100% me because I have a tumor pushing against my brain, or whatever it may be.
And I think that, we talked about like timing of this stuff too. Like, how long would you, like, what's better? Do you know, like long decline or like immediacy? And I think that my situation was so stark. Like, they were like, you need this out. So it was almost like the logistics were so full on my days that I was diagnosed on April 8th and I had brain surgery on the 25th. But before the 25th, even, there were other procedures that needed to happen. And again, like the ongoing treadmill of children and naps and snacks and whatever, that, I immediately closed Plucky, my business, to say, I hope I'll be back someday, but right now that can't happen. So it's almost like I didn't have time to worry about that.
And you were forced into decisions as quick as possible, which there's no time for you to like second guess or any of that, which is kind of a blessing in a way.
Exactly. And that's what I mean. Like, the fact that it was like the Band-Aid pull and then shortly after the brain surgery, it did not give me personally time to be scared. I was definitely scared when we got close, like they start wheeling me into the OR, and not to be graphic, but I hear there's the team around. They're so friendly. Hey, Jen, we're here to help. And then I hear a guy with like saws and like metal sounding things. And then I was like,
oh my taking God. Off like,
what is about to happen to me?
Yeah. They're about to saw into your skull.
Get in there. Yeah, exactly. And, so I think like the narrative building of like, why would I have chosen this? And then like okay, like everybody's okay. And now when my mom flew in, when she got there, it was like, okay, my mom and my husband can handle the kids. Like I'm off duty a little bit, like just like preparing all that stuff, packing the metaphorical lunches. Then when they wheel me into the OR, that's the time where I'm like, what the ever loving F is about to happen to me.
But luckily you didn't have a decision there. Like,
well, luckily they had already put the thing on. So it was about
exactly.
4 seconds and then it was like, boom, gone,
Yeah.
So yeah, the fear came later, like probably 6 weeks post-op, and anger and grief and confusion and all that. But in those, it was like frozen time really beforehand.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that other part, because I think a lot of us might be able to relate to those emotions, but not in the same way that you did. So what was after you woke up? Like, do you remember waking up?
I do remember waking up. It was like, I don't know, like waking up from a good dream or something. Like you're kind of barely there. And I remember my husband, and this is in the book too, this scene, but like my husband and mom and brother were there. And I like recognized their presence, but I don't know that I could have said their names right then. I couldn't really say a lot of things. I perceived like they want to know if I'm okay. And I just kept saying, okay. Like, and I don't know, that's probably a brain problem in itself, but I had this like wonderful nurse, this guy, Ron, and he was like behind this glass window. Well, at least is what I remember, right? One of my eyes, you have to know at this point, is now completely like swollen shut and like everything. My head's shaved, my head's bandaged. So in the end, I couldn't really see too much. I didn't realize the eye was shut until the next day. And then I was like, oh, okay. But anyway, I have this like lovely nurse guy who keeps coming in to check on me. And I felt the room is so dark and there are just these little lights, from machines, I guess. And I felt like I was in space and he was like NASA ground control, and he would come in and check on me and then he'd go away. And I just, like, again, alluding to the spiritual stuff, like I just felt so held in love in that room. I did not feel alone. I felt like there was something or some things that were like with me and holding with me. And then this lovely nurse, he would come in and I was like, I just need to tell him about those visions I had, but I couldn't really put a lot of sentences together. So right. I kept it chill. But those first few hours were lovely. And then the next day, it's like the sun is in your eyes and you don't feel great. And you realize they've taken out like cheekbone and stuff and put it back in, but you can't eat. You can't open your mouth and like you haven't slept. And the daytime nurses are grumpy. And, it's just like crash. Like, what the hell is this now? So yeah, that was the first sign of grumpiness, I guess I'll say.
Would you say that's when a lot of those like grief or like, is my life going to come back to where it was? Like, did you have did you go through the stages of grief in whatever order? Did you have any of those elements?
It feels like you put the stages of grief in a blender and that's how I had them, like not in necessarily the logical order. The big moments that I remember really breaking down were probably about 6 weeks later. I had randomly, coincidentally, but maybe not, met a guy in a cafe. My husband had gone back to work. I think it was maybe 8 weeks actually post-op. But anyway, I was able to drive. So I drove, to a coffee shop. I would go there in the mornings. And this guy from across the bar or across the coffee shop says like, did you just have brain surgery? And I was like, yes. And I noticed that he also had a rainbow scar, but his hair had grown back a bit. And I said, did you? And he said, yeah, who's your doctor? And I said, Dr. McDermott at UCSF. And he said, me too. And so we were like connected. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're like the alumni of, Dr. McDermott, who's amazing. And then he said, are you going to the cancer support group? And I said, no, actually mine was not cancer. So there was not that I knew of, there was no support group. And this guy, so I was 35. I think he was a couple years younger than me. We kind of make a plan. Okay, in a couple weeks when he's back up for treatment, he and his fiance and we meet for breakfast. And, you know, it's just so different. Like his situation is just my worst nightmare. You know, mine was not cancer, his was. And the guilt that I felt, it was like gratitude, but guilt, ugliness, like, you know, now I'm supposed to be happy about my circumstance, but it sucked also, you know, like all that, it made me very, very effed up, if I can, I don't know how much.
Yeah. Confused. I mean, it's just, but I think that's so real. I think that is so real. And I think a lot of us grow up thinking each emotion like exists on its own, and you can like have this one and then you move to the next one. But in reality, it's like they're all there and fighting with each other. And so, yeah, I mean, and then we're naturally comparative, I think, as a society. So then, like you said, like, oh, well, mine wasn't as bad as his, but it was the worst thing you've ever experienced. So, and it's probably the worst thing he's ever experienced. And so that's such a natural thing. And then we have the guilt of not having it as bad as someone else, or not, you know.
Yeah. I mean, that survivor's
so
guilt was real then, you know, not to spoil everything, but he did not live a lot longer. And I now have a number of people in my life who have brain tumors that are not benign like mine. And, you know, just sometimes, like, I don't know if this is true for you too, but the trauma, the story that becomes your life, then you're like the touch point. So when somebody's friend or mother or aunt or husband gets diagnosed with a brain tumor, I get that call. And so I'm, you know, supporting as a friend. I know a number of people who are not lucky in the way that I was. And so in that most productive version of that feeling, I have a carpe diem approach now to life, where it's like, I'm trying to think of a good example. I guess it was last year. Yeah, last year. The long story short is I studied abroad in France. I lived there for a little while teaching English. It's very beloved to me, and I speak French. My older son started learning French last year. He really liked it. And he's a tricky one to buy presents for because he's so amenable, and, you know, he never has like a real passion. His brother's very the opposite. So he kind of expressed last summer, like, oh, that's so neat. One day I would really love to go to France. And my husband and I were like, let's do it. So we took him for his birthday last year. And it seemed a little ridiculous. We kept him out of school like 4 days. He's in 7th grade. And there were lots of logical reasons you could make, arguments you could make. But we are way into that kind of decision these days. It's like, what a core memory. He will be with both of us. He's learning to speak French. This could really connect him with that trajectory. I mean, at the end of the day, with all this stuff, you're just like, what are you waiting for? Like, let's go. You know, I'm not saying be irresponsible and, you know, burn your life down, but at the same time, like, what a gift to know you don't actually need to wait for permission for anybody. Tomorrow you could just wake up and say, we're the kind of people that plan a trip somewhere just to spend time with our son because he's into it. And we didn't even use hotel points, you know, like it was like one of those extreme joy things.
Were you someone that wouldn't take those big leaps beforehand, would you say?
What a great question. I think that I had the DNA to want to do those things, but the eldest child of 3 kids growing up in outside New York City type A organization, as discussed, personality, that it's almost like this life shift just like cleared all that out. I'm still obviously responsible. I'm still, you know, a good eldest child, but I have given up a lot of roles that I used to play before. And just feel like, well, that'll be someone else's job now, you know, literally some jobs like volunteer jobs, and then also some roles I play in a family dynamic or other friend groups. Just like, well, someone else could take that over now. I'm all set with it. And that is a huge freaking gift.
Yeah. Oh, here's a dumb question. So you had what was seemingly the size of a lemon removed from your head. Dumb question coming. Do you feel do you feel like you're missing something, or something was taken out, removed, and it may be a good thing, but something about you was taken out at that same time.
I've never really connected that metaphorically. I didn't think of it that way, but again, that intimacy that I was talking about with the universe and the bigger things, I call it in my book bigness, like whatever bigness is. Obviously, some people are going to use God or the universe or who knows, the math of everything. But the intimacy that I felt like I was introduced to there, that was like the takeaway. It wasn't necessarily something was removed or something was put back, or, when you look at the MRIs, it's absurd. My brain is crammed in over to the right side, I guess, away from this tumor. And then you look at the next one and there's this huge hole, like where they took it out. And it took time for things to sort of move back. It hasn't fully, but
So maybe it made space for that.
I think it
bigness.
did. Yeah. And okay. So great point there. I was just saying this to somebody yesterday. I know other people who are going through illnesses right now as, brain surgeons or brain surgeries and whatever. And all I want to say to them is, dear God, don't go on Facebook 2 days post-op. Use that time. Like, people jump right back into life so quickly, and sometimes there's necessity. I do understand that. But if you ever have any other time in your life where you don't have to text people back, where you don't have to post what your breakfast was on Instagram, where you don't have to worry about who emailed you or just any of that, like, take the W, man. Like, clear
and
your
don't
schedule.
Google things.
And don't Google things. Yeah, exactly. I really think that I would not have been able to hear myself so deeply if I had allowed that noise to persist and continue. I mean, luckily my brain was pretty fragile. I couldn't listen to music or podcasts or watch TV or anything for a while. But like, all of that represents just like content flow in. And I think avoiding all of that for, whatever it ended up being, let's say 2 or 3 weeks, allowed me to hear stuff that I never would have if I hadn't made the space.
So with that in mind, how did this experience affect the people around you, like your husband or your children or your mother? Did something change in your relationships with them because of this?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, my husband is a flippin' saint, like he kept everybody together, kept the kids on rails, like everything. I think that kind of situation could make or break a marriage, honestly. And I'm sure it has many times, but for us, we sort of, it really cemented us. And we know that we're so lucky in so many ways. We talked about what happens if I don't make it through this? Like, what do I want you to do for the kids? Or, like, we had some of those serious conversations. The weirdest part was when I was like, hey, I kind of think there might be a God thing. And he was like, that's like a first date question, right, Matt? Like, you go on a first date, you're like, are you religious? Are you religious? Okay. And I was like, I'm not really religious, but I was like, I answer that a little differently now. And so that was an interesting dynamic. For my mom, I think, she probably just, everyone's traumatized, right? But like, I think she's, especially with the book out now, she's just really proud, really happy. And the kids, so I said they're 10 and 3. Neither of them have read the book yet, even though there's 9,000 copies of it around and we even have the ebook. But I think that they perceive, they've come to some book tour events with me, and I think they perceive people are like, really like, oh my God, like that was so scary, or you lived, and I think they're just maybe not ready to read that yet, which is completely fine by me. I think that they should have a period of time where they allow themselves to be like, mom is annoying, instead of like, oh God, mom almost died. Like that, that's literally the life she lived. It's a lot of pressure. So my biggest hope for this book, honestly, was to like put myself in an object so that if something ever happens again, or in some other illness or life circumstance, that like I'm leaving a part of myself for them. And it's not like a guide to anything, when you get married, do this, nothing, but that I'm modeling a kind of behavior, a kind of way of looking at life for them. And maybe for my grandkids and great grandkids, like, who wouldn't want a memoir from their like ancestor, right? Like I would love to stumble on one of those.
Well, they got the podcast that you're going on, so they also have your voice to hear you, which a lot of us don't have of our ancestors. And, you know, even, I don't have recordings of like grandparents, you know, so it's, you know, so it's a whole thing for all the generations to come, that they get to hear these conversations that were hundreds of years ago or whatever it may be at the time. So that's a fascinating thought. And now I feel some sort of way about that, but
hopefully inspired.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Complex.
All the feelings at once, you know, put them in a blender, like you said. I'm wondering if this version of you, like one of those headache days where you're just like, this is annoying. Is there anything you'd want to whisper in her ear?
Well, I recognize the question because, like I said, I've listened to a couple of your episodes, and another version that you sometimes ask people is, would you change it? You know, and I was thinking about that today too.
Well, you chose it.
Yeah, I know. It's very annoying to have, you know, perspective myself out of it. The truth is that I would not change the perspective I've come to, which is that type of like, live life to the max, not irresponsibly, but like, why not have a, you know, do it up, appreciate when you can, and take risks also when you can. But I wish I didn't have to go through it to learn that, you know. That's the honest truth. There are some days now that the book is out, it feels like a more inspiring glow around it. But certainly before I had, you know, before the book was coming out, when I was working on it, I just was like sick of this story. Like, I'm the brain tumor girl. Like, I'm the one who almost died. I'm, you know, the one that people like are going to be careful with.
You're fragile
in some ways.
But you're not.
And that's boring.
Well, I mean, you have your own narrative. Like you've taken that and you've run with it. And yes, will you always be the woman who had brain surgery? Like, yeah. So what? You know, like this is what you're making of it now, and what that journey that you wouldn't wish on any other person taught you about yourself. I mean, I have the same conversation with myself. It's like, I never would want my mom to die. Like, I can't imagine what my life would be like if she hadn't. But I also know I would not be this version of me talking to people like yourself and really feeling in tune with or aligned with who I am and how I feel and all those things. I know for sure, at least the way I was living with her before, I wouldn't be this version of me. So it's like, it's a very hard question. But luckily we can't go back and change things. So I guess we're stuck with the versions that we are. And it's to your point of what you've kind of adopted now is like, make the most of what you're doing, because we can't change it.
The other like exciting thing about it is, what would I need to do to make some other story the headliner, right? So like, I don't know, I'm making this up, right? But like, Jen wrote a book and saved 1,000 kittens, you know, like it has nothing to do with the book, but you know what I'm saying? Like, what other amazing thing, feat, adventure, what else could my life hinge on in the next 10 years? And how could the brain tumor story be a stop on the way, but hopefully not bad things, but like what adventure could I have that would also define my identity? And I think there's a real invitation there for me to say, yeah, bad stuff happened, but what do I have control over? What can I raise my hand for? What can I stir up in this moment?
What could you intentionally choose instead of
exactly
the story, you know, like of saying like, what if I did this? It's now like, this is what I choose. Like, let's go. And it's so much easier said than done, though. I think for so many, especially Americans, I think just society taught us to be a certain way. And it's really hard. I think there are a lot of people like us in our 40s, like now realizing from whatever experiences we had before that like, oh, we can live a full life. We can do all these things. We don't have to please everyone around us. We don't, you know, all the things that a lot of our generation is now like shedding and moving through the world. And it's kind of a shame. But again, would we know the value of it had we done it all along?
Totally. Every generation has their thing. So, like it's probably screen time for the people right now who were kids during COVID. But, if you say like, okay, I am part of that generation and maybe some of that is my story, but what parts of the story do I get to write myself? And that I think is the big invitation.
Well, yeah. And I think that's what a lot of us are doing now. We have that opportunity. And I think we always knew we had the opportunity, but maybe some of us were just a little apprehensive about taking that life by the reins and doing, what served us, I guess, instead of like what we thought other people wanted to see us do, which was very much my story for a very long time. So, I think you are who you are because of what you made from your experience. I don't think your experience made you. I think from what I got in this really long hour that we've spent together, but, like what I gather is your experience didn't define you. You defined your experience, if that makes sense.
That seems right. It does. And I had someone a couple weeks ago just say something off the cuff about, there's sort of this like vision that I alluded to before about my future that's in the book. And she said something about that, like, oh yeah, when are you going to do that plan? And I thought, the fact that you just think I might buy land and make this property and like the fact that you think that's like at all like one step away from who I am today shows how much I have changed in 10 years, because I wasn't afraid and I wasn't like a risk averse person, but I kind of feel like how you were just describing it. I feel like maybe I was the like, when you have a coloring book, it's like the shape of something, but there's no colors on it. I think I had that again in my DNA. I wanted to be a big dreamer. I wanted to do that stuff. But today I'm like colored in, so I like lived into that. And the fact that like some of these crazy risky things that I lay out in the book seem very natural as qualities of mine to people I randomly meet today, it's like that more than anything proves that I am a different version of myself today.
Yeah. Well, and you're showing others how they could possibly be, not to copy you, but to align, to feel aligned, to move through the world in a way that feels purposeful for themselves, whatever that might look like. And it might be little tiny steps, who knows? Or it could be just big giant leaps, but whatever gets people leaning more into who they are and what they want for themselves in this world, I think the better off we all are, because I think, by you living in your space, by me living in alignment with my stuff, I think if everyone does that, the world just becomes more rich and interesting. And who knows where that thought just came out of my head, but that's how we do here on the Life Shift. So you mentioned your book. Like if someone's interested in your story from this conversation, they want to read your book, they want to read the future predictions that you have in your book. Like what's the best way to find you, maybe tell you their story, get your book?
Yeah,
What's up?
I love all of it. Okay, so the book for people watching, here's what it looks like, but it's called I Believe in Everything. You can just also look for Jen Dary as the author. You could look on Amazon, you could look on Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, like any indie bookstore. I probably won't stock it unless you live locally to Arlington, Virginia, where I do, but you can get it anywhere you like books. There's also an ebook. And and also jendarywriter.com. I'll give it to you. Maybe you have show notes, but jendarywriter.com is my writing email, and there's a contact form. And I would absolutely love to hear from people who have had their own life shift, or who have had a brain tumor, or who any kinds of things have like felt not alone in the universe because of some bigger presence. Like those are honestly my favorite emails coming out of this book, Matt, is people who are saying, I had this experience. I never told anybody because I thought people would think I was nuts, but I read your book and I want to tell somebody. So I'm telling you that whatever it is, I saw my dead mother, I gave birth and I almost died, and I became a bird for a few minutes and then I went back in my body. Like all this stuff. I'm like, everyone should only email me that for the rest of time. I don't want any other emails, nothing else, only those. Yeah. It's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. And it's something when someone else's story can validate your own. Like like you said, like, oh, I thought this was so weird, so I never told anyone. Then you hear someone say it and you're like, oh, maybe that wasn't weird. Maybe that was just me surviving, or whatever it means for the world. So thank you for just going on this journey and this conversation today. I think it was just the way it was meant to be.
I feel the same way. Thank you, Matt, for having me.
Well, I appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone listening. It's been a beautiful I'm in year 5 now, which is kind of crazy to me, but also just, I couldn't imagine not doing it. So here we go. We're going to carry on, and I'm going to say goodbye to Jen, and I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Thanks again, Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Life Shift Podcast. If you want to learn more, go to www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com. There you can check out all the different episodes. You can check out the blog, some of the reviews for the podcast, and the Life Shift Journal. Links are there, so you can purchase your own copy, whether in digital or print format. Thanks again.